there. But today, with Chips for America moving ahead in the Senate and ahead of Q2 GDP on Thursday, we wanted to bring in Brian Deese, Director of National Economic Council, to answer your questions directly on all of the economic news of the day. And with that, Brian?
Thanks, Green. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to start with a couple of updates on some of our core economic priorities here at the White House, and then happy to take your questions. Three updates. The first is on what has been a longstanding administration priority around attracting more investment into the United States, building more secure supply chains, and building more industrial strength here in America. I just came from a meeting in the Roosevelt Room with the president and the chairman of SK, South Korean conglomerate, and they made today a very significant announcement, $22 billion in investment in the United States across a broad complex of investments that all share a common feature. They all are at the cutting edge of innovation in manufacturing globally. So we're talking large capacity batteries, electric vehicle charging manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing, and pharmaceuticals. And the president noted this at top, but it was clear in the context of the meeting that SK's confidence and commitment in making this kind of long-term and very significant investment in the United States is a clear signal that the United States, along with its allies, is winning the technology competition for the 21st century. And of course, this comes in the context of a significant vote that the Senate took just earlier today in bipartisan fashion to move forward the historic Chips for America Act. Some of you were with us just yesterday, when we were meeting with CEOs and labor leaders to underscore the economic and national security significance of this piece of legislation, and we are hopeful that we can get that piece of legislation to the president's desk here without delay. And I think you connect these things together, what you see is a really historic resurgence in American manufacturing and American innovation. I would note that over the past 18 months, we've seen the economy create 613,000 jobs just in manufacturing alone. That's the strongest growth in manufacturing in 3 decades. And again, I think it demonstrates that in the aggregate, across investing in infrastructure, working with partners and allies, prioritizing research, prioritizing things like semiconductors, we are building an innovation ecosystem here in the United States to attract this investment, particularly in the context of a period prior to this when we were seeing more and more of that investment go to China. Second priority I just wanted to update you on is energy and energy markets. I hope that you are all aware and have seen the progress that we're making on gas prices coming down here in the United States. But as you've heard the president say, and certainly our team's focus is to keep up on the key policy priorities that are helping to stabilize markets, even in the face of global uncertainty and a globally uncertain energy market. And so I would just note today, again, 2 pieces of news. The first is that the Department of Energy published its next notice of sale for release of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. These releases have really proved critical over the last several months, when I think I was here initially and announced that the president had directed the goal of releasing 1 million barrels a day. A lot of the questions that you and others had was whether this was even feasible, whether it was actually feasible to sustain putting 1 million barrels a day onto the market consistently. We've now demonstrated that that is the case, and a new analysis out from the Treasury Department today underscores the significance that that collective release from the United States and our allies has reduced gas prices by about 40 cents a gallon compared to where we would be had the president not directed that action and worked with our international partners. The second is the administration, the Department of Energy, is proposing a new rule today that would allow DOE to enter into forward contracts to purchase oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the future at a fixed set price. This sounds a little wonky, but bear with me. It's actually quite important. What it means is that producers, oil producers, have more certainty about future demand for their product, because the Department of Energy, having released significant oil onto the market, is now going to be a significant purchaser of oil into the future. So with this rule in place, they will be able to enter into fixed contracts to buy at a set price. And what that does is it provides oil producers more certainty and more incentive to produce in the near term if they know that they're going to get paid at a fixed price at a future date. I would note that those purchases are not going to happen until well in the future, and because of the shape of the futures curve in oil, we can actually purchase more oil, replenish the SPR, strengthen that national asset without competing for demand for barrels in the near term. So that rule was proposed today, and the Department of Energy will be working to finalize that and then work with the industry to enter into these fixed price contracts for repurchase. The third priority is in context around what we have discussed with you all around our economic goal of transitioning from a historically strong recovery into a period of more stable and steady growth. We are in that period of transition right now. I think it's the analogy is to running legs of a race, where we ran the first leg of this race at an extraordinarily fast clip. That has served us well in terms of positioning us in a stronger position than virtually any other country in the world. And now we are seeing growth slowing, which is what we should expect, or we would expect. But as we look across the economy today, what we and other outside analysts identify is that consumer spending remains solid. Household balance sheets remain largely in good shape. We are seeing credit delinquencies and measures of credit stress at historic lows. Credit card delinquencies at a 15-year low, mortgage delinquencies at a 30-year low. And we are seeing industrial output sustain and in positive territory 5 of the last 6 months. And so the totality of the economic data is consistent with that type of transition and is not consistent with a recession. Just to dig into that a little bit, a couple of points. One is on hiring, and I think we have a chart here. But just to explain what you're looking at here, during the second quarter, the economy created 375,000 jobs a month. So that's the yellow bar on the far side. In the first few months of every recession since the 1980s, the economy lost jobs. And so historically in the United States, when we're in a recession, I think this is sort of typical common sense understanding of recession, but it also happens to be the case, the economy is losing jobs. In the second quarter of this year, there was record-setting job creation. In fact, if you look at the period immediately preceding recessions in the United States, job growth is roughly 1/3 of what it was in the second quarter. So what we're seeing on the labor market side is a continued resilient, strong labor market recovery. On spending and investment, again, what economists think about as core to the economy's strength, what consumers are doing in terms of spending, what households are doing in terms of investment in businesses. Real private final demand, which measures consumption and investment by consumers and businesses. It grew at 3% in the first quarter. It's expected to grow in the second quarter. And then again, that's in contrast to what we see typically during recessions. So I just want to make a final note on the definition of recession, which has been an issue that I know many of you have reported on. As Secretary Yellen said on Sunday, 2 negative quarters of GDP growth is not the technical definition of recession. It's not the definition that economists have traditionally relied on. There is an organization called the National Bureau of Economic Research, and what they do is they look at a broad range of data in deciding whether or not a recession has occurred. That is the process that economists and administrations have used for years and decades to identify when a recession has occurred. But from the president's perspective, putting that technical question aside, the most important question economically is whether working people and middle-class families have more breathing room, they have more job opportunities, their wages are going up in a stable way, and they're able to afford the important things in their lives, from food and gasoline also to health care and prescription drugs, and afford education for themselves and their children and otherwise. And that is what has animated his economic strategy. It's what his focus is on. It's why you have seen him as focused as he has been on trying to work to take policy actions that will lower prices and lower costs for American families in this moment, even as we work to bring inflation down and effectuate that transition to a more stable and steady state. So with that, let me pause and happy to take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Brian. You've spent a lot of time in the White House as this week trying to explain why you believe that the U.S. is not definitionally in a recession. But why should the average American who is really concerned about their personal economic situation and their wages aren't increasing as fast as inflation, they're struggling to put food on the table, fill up their tank, why should they care if the U.S. is definitionally in a recession or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was what I was trying to underscore in terms of where the president really centers on in terms of his economic policy and his economic goals. At core, what his focus is and the direction to his team is to say, are we putting in place the right policies and the right strategies that will help those working Americans, middle-class families, achieve some measure of economic security and economic dignity, and be able to have upward economic mobility as well. And I think if you look at the progress that we have made over the course of the last 18 months, we have made historic strides in many areas, not the least of which has been the pace of this historic economic recovery and the return of job growth, the increase in wages, particularly for those at the bottom end, the equitable nature of this recovery. And we have a serious inflation challenge, which is hitting economies around the globe, but is hitting Americans. And that's why you have a president that is focused as acutely as he is on what we can do to actually lower prices right now. And I would say that the reduction in gas prices that you've seen over the last couple of weeks is providing some measure of breathing room. Not enough, but some measure of breathing room. The steps to pass the CHIPS bill, as we've discussed, will make a big difference in terms of not only jobs here in America, but increasing the supply, building the resilience of our supply chains, which we have seen have been so connected to increase costs. So that's where the president's priorities are, and that's where he's focused. This is about trying to actually improve the lives and outcomes of middle-class families.
This is a related question, but all the discussions that are happening about the definition of a recession aside, I wonder if you could help us understand how much weight the White House puts on that definition versus just the simple reality that the majority of Americans right now just feel like we are living through a recession right now.
Look, our focus is on trying to improve economic circumstances in this country. That's what we are focused on, and that's what all of our policies are designed to do. So when we think about what we're prioritizing, when the president is focused on taking actions like a historic step to put 1 million barrels a day of oil onto the market, it's because we know, and we now have seen in the data, that helps to reduce energy prices, that helps to reduce gas prices, and we can help to encourage the process we've seen of gas prices coming down by about 70 cents, by about $100 a month. So that's where our focus is. Obviously, we spend a lot of time analyzing economic data as you do as well. But in the core, that's what our objective is, and that's where our focus is.
And just as his economic advisor, do you think that the president currently is sort of able to fully understand, internalize the fact that I think a recent CNN poll said that 64% of Americans believe the country is already in a recession? Do you think his travels, his meetings, the conversations he's able to have with people from the White House, that has been enough for him to really understand that?
Look, I think that President Biden, before he ran for office, as president and now, is somebody who deeply understands what it means to be in a family where you're sitting around a kitchen table. You all have heard him say this multiple times, but it's because it's his lived experience to sit around a kitchen table and understand what it means when the price of gas goes up or the price of food goes up. And that's why You hear him when he is talking about economic issues go directly to that as the core of understanding that's the challenge and what can we do to address it. It's also why you're going to hear him be as emphatic as he is about why when something like gas prices come down, that means that those same families are getting a little breathing room. And that's, I'm using his terminology about how he communicates about this issue, that it's that breathing room. It's that when you get to the end of the month and you have enough to make things add up, that certainly animates him, and you've heard that from him repeatedly.
On that breathing room, gas, of course, is down. You guys have been touting that down over the past month, but in other areas, things like food and rent still appear to be climbing. Is it the White House view that inflation has peaked?
So it's our view that inflation is the top economic priority that we need to be focused on as a country. And it is our view that if we move out more quickly and more aggressively on the types of steps that the president has outlined, then we are going to move more quickly to helping to bring prices down. So you talked about some of those costs. Well, one of the big cost drivers that families are facing is the cost of healthcare and prescription drugs. And we have an opportunity, and the president has been fighting for some time, to finally do something to reform prescription drug pricing, to bring down the cost for seniors, for families, for people with chronic conditions, and also bring down the cost of the federal government. And reduce the deficit in a way that would be complementary to the Fed's policies. So that's our view, and that's why we're putting the priority that we are on getting more progress on these policies.
Brian, the president's economic advisors were telling us last year that inflation was going to be temporary. That's not true. Now the president's economic advisors are saying there's not going to be a recession. Are you sure?
Well, let me just say this. We look at a range of data, we assess that data, and we lay it out for ourselves and for the president. But you don't have to take our word on this.
But the president does.
On the question, no. But we also look at what outside analysts are doing. We look at every type of analysis that you could imagine. But let me just highlight. So, Citigroup. Little of the data that I see tells me that the U.S. is on the cusp of a recession. Morgan Stanley, with strong job growth and continued robust final domestic demand and consumption, this economy really does not look particularly recessionary. J.P. Morgan, it is inconceivable for a labor market that has generated close to 500,000 jobs, average monthly gains for the past 6 months, to be in a recession. So we analyze the data, we look at the data, we understand the significant uncertainties that exist in the global economy, including issues of war, including issues of supply chains. But we also look at what other analysts and outside observers are, and certainly that's something that I know you and your outlets do as well.
And we've been listening to the White House Daily Press Briefing. Director of the National Economic Council, Brian Deese, touted the administration's efforts to fight inflation. He also spoke about the new partnership with a South Korean company to build more manufacturing in the U.S. He also discussed the administration's efforts to bring down gas prices.
Deese addressed inflation by saying we are moving out of a recovery. He said that we are not moving into a recession, but his comments come as the Fed is poised to raise interest rates tomorrow. He also says that he does not believe that we're headed into a recession, pushed back very firmly against that by talking about the definition, not just the 2 quarters of down GDP. So joining us now is Laurie Bettinger. She is the president of Bank Alliance. She also served as the former director of the Troubled Asset Relief Program under the Obama administration. Laurie, thanks for joining us. So we heard Brian Deese say that consumer spending is strong, but a new report shows that consumer confidence fell for a third consecutive month in July. Which indicator is more important when you're looking at this?
A great question. And like so many things recently, we're just seeing conflicting information everywhere. So as you mentioned, and as we just heard, there are signs everywhere of really strong consumer health. A bunch of large banks have big credit card businesses just announced earnings, and we heard a lot of the CEOs talk about, the strength of the American consumer with credit card balances falling. I saw some reports on that yesterday. And then today we see that for the third month in a row, consumer confidence has fallen. I think we're at sort of levels immediately at the beginning of the COVID pandemic onset. And so it's sort of like, how do you reconcile these things? And if you dig a little bit into the survey, I think you can start to see that, people might feel okay about their present situation, maybe not as positive as they did a few months ago, but it's really hard not to worry about the future when everything you see and hear expresses concerns. What's the world going to look like? Are businesses slowing down? Will job growth slow? And so you just sort of have this mix match of all these sort of what's going on today and what are our future expectations. And we're seeing that, I think, in every part of the economy right now.
And Laurie, the Federal Reserve is expected to raise interest rates by 75 basis points tomorrow. Explain to viewers, if you will, what this means exactly and what impact it could have on the U.S. economy.
Right. So the Fed, has, as you said, has said that they'll most likely raise interest rates tomorrow. And they're really hoping to sort of slow down the economy. And by that, slow down inflation. We keep hearing so much about inflation, and particularly in food and energy prices, how much of an impact that's having on all of us, on all of, American households. And so when you raise the cost of borrowing, of the cost of carrying debt, the idea is that it makes you slow down your purchases. Maybe you would need to, borrow money to buy a car, and now the cost of borrowing money is higher, so you don't buy that car. Same in housing, same for large ticket purchases. So when the Fed raises interest rates, they're trying to cool the economy, not cause a recession, but just slow it down enough and slow down purchasing so that hopefully these price increases we keep seeing month after month will start to slow, or even better, stop.
Well, some traders believe that the Fed's aggressive policy tightening could lead to a recession. Of course, we're talking about what we expect they're going to say. That was based really off of what happened in their last meeting. I'm wondering what your take is on all of this, if you think it matters if we're in a technical recession as Deese defined it, or how others have defined it in the past. And how likely do you think it is that that the Fed will be aggressive again in raising interest rates?
It's a great question. I think the Fed is going to be aggressive. They've said as much. They've tried to make sure that their actions are matching, what they're saying they're going to do, because no matter where you look, inflation is a huge problem. And the best tool they have to fight inflation and rising prices for all of us in all these different aspects of our life is to raise interest rates. And so, it's going to be maybe an unusual situation, right, where tomorrow we might hear about the Fed raising interest rates. And on Wednesday, we might hear that, GDP growth, the growth of our economy continues to slow. And usually you don't think about those two things as going together. But, and I think we heard a question, there are these technical definitions of a recession in true Washington fashion. You have an agency with an acronym responsible for looking at it in a historical context. But I don't know how much it matters today, because think about it. The more you hear about uncertainty, the more it makes you question some of your own financial decisions. Maybe you think to yourself, hey, I want to take a vacation, but maybe I shouldn't go as long. Maybe I shouldn't take as expensive a one. Maybe I'm going to have to put some of this on my credit card, and I'm going to be paying more for my credit card balances. So I think the more we talk about it, the more likely it becomes that we see consumers pull back, whether we have a technical recession or not. I mean, so much of this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, whether it's a recession in your mind or an actual recession, sometimes has the same result.
It drives consumer confidence,
Right.
And it has effects on companies, et
That's
cetera.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, Laurie Bettinger, thank you so much for breaking it down for us. We really appreciate your financial insight.
Thanks for having me.
The physician to the president says President Biden now feels well enough to exercise after contracting COVID-19 last week.
Today marks the president's 5th day of isolation at the White House. Mr. Biden reportedly completed his Paxlovid treatment Monday evening, mirroring his Monday diagnosis. The doctor said his symptoms have now, quote, almost completely resolved. His pulse, blood pressure, and temperature are all, quote, absolutely normal. President Biden will continue isolating. The physician did not say whether or not he tested